Hello and welcome to the second edition of the EastFlank podcast. My name is Aneta Zachova and I'm editor-in-chief of Euractiv Czechia, and I will be also moderating today's discussion. In this episode, we'll be looking at elections, disinformation and foreign interference, topics we were covering in our January collaborative report. This podcast is focusing on three particular countries: Czechia, Latvia and Romania. From Romania's annual presidential election to Latvia's upcoming parliamentary vote and changes in Czechia with the new government, we will explore what has changed, what lessons are being applied, and where blind spots remain. It is my great pleasure to discuss this topic with my two colleagues, Manuela Preotesa from Euractiv Romania and Philips Lastovskis from Delphi Latvia. Thank you for joining us, and let's begin with the first topic. As I mentioned, Romania experienced an unprecedented moment in 2024 when the presidential elections were annulled due to foreign interference. Manuela, first question goes to you. How was the public and political debate around disinformation evolved since the annual elections? Because we know that there was a lot of attention given to these elections in 2024, but what happened since then? Has this political debate became more serious or more polarized? What were the main developments?
Indeed, as you said, it was unprecedented. It was an unprecedented event. I'm going to repeat it because it was really a shocking event which struck us all. And since then, the trust in the information environment as a whole has shifted dramatically. As you said, we are observing radicalization even within families, leading to deepening rifts and growing divisions. What actually happened since then was the surprise and somehow the legitimization of a certain pro-Russian discourse, which was quite new in Romania. Maybe it was somehow existing before, but somehow it had remained hidden till the moment of elections. And even the fact itself of the annulment is still shocking to us. I mean, we haven't had a similar event in this, let's say, fragile post-democracy era. But this is what happened. What actually happened was a surprise, and I know we discovered again what we knew somehow. It was the fact that this fragile democracy has its skeleton in the closet. We know that, and it was revealed even more. We didn't manage to, clean our fragile democracy of, former members of the secret police, old police securitate, old nomenclatura, and those connected to the darker aspect of the communist era, which remained somehow, like the Lord of the Darkness, but sometimes even openly, without remorse or shame. So people are starting to question whether the state can really protect its citizens. Will the citizen have the motivation to defend, not only fragile, but somehow corrupted state? That's the main issue. I mean, as I said, it's this shift in trust.
And regarding what you are saying, because it seems as a very serious disruption of trust to, when it comes to state, elections, democracy itself. So since these annual elections, have any new laws, strategies, or some concrete tools been introduced, to prevent similar scenario from happening again in the future?
Yes, indeed, the disruption in the trust was not. Of course, the annulment was a consequence, but the fact itself that such massive disinformation with evidences which needs to be proven of another state actor interference, of FIMI, foreign interference, right, as we know it in the literature. But the shock itself that the state couldn't protect you against such disinformation, large disinformation activities, is frightening. And I will not hide the fact that the journalists themselves felt and still feel threatened. Their lives threatened, which are circulating in the online environment. It has become even more aggressive, as you said, even more polarized, even more radicalized, and sometimes within the same family. I mean, sometimes it's, you feel the fear to express your view even within some friendly circles, because you don't know what opinions the people have within this, very, how to say, tight circle. And speaking about the external communication, I mean, all this trolling, all those lessons which are simply circulating in your environment, it's simply becoming more and more, not only stressful, but disturbing.
Yes, I can imagine, like, even without annual elections, it's sometimes difficult to face this polarization within a family. So, of course, after such a huge event, it's even more difficult.
To answer your question, yes, the paradox was that indeed we did have legislation, but it was not applied, it was not implemented in a proper way, just to be brief. Yes.
Okay, so do you think that for the next elections, perhaps it's time to finally implement these new tools or the legislation, or do you think that there will be any new instruments coming in direction to that, or what do you expect?
Actually, we had the rerun elections in May, and of course, it was quite short period to have a big change, but there was a change somehow. The legislation is there, but it's not easy to implement it because, as you know, it's about big platforms, global AI dominance, and it's not. I know it's not easy at the level of the state. We need cooperation, transnational cooperation.
Yeah, it's definitely not in powers of one state to face these, big platforms and algorithms and these kind of things. That's definitely space for the EU cooperation in this regard. I would like now ask Philips, because as I mentioned at the beginning, Latvia is heading into parliamentary elections later this year. And, still we, especially from the Central Europe, we think that in Baltic countries, everything is, somehow better, that you are more prepared of foreign interference or these kind of threats. So what is your perspective? Do you see any intensification of efforts to tackle disinformation and foreign interference ahead of the vote? Are there any specific initiatives, specific tools that are being deployed to, make these elections safe and fair?
I think that the grass is always greener in the other side of the wall, and this could be one of the cases that maybe you think that in Baltics we have everything great, but I think we also struggles with democratic institutions and in trust in it. It could be different as in Central Europe right now, but we have our own problems and issues, so it's not perfect. But if we are thinking about the elections, what we will have this year, then I wouldn't say that it's some kind of as a biggest risk as interference in these elections, because the interference as a hybrid operations or as a disinformation campaigns in Latvia, they are ongoing all the time. It's like not focused on one event. Last year we had municipal elections, and we also didn't see some kind of specific interference on these elections, or before 2 years European Parliament elections also not. The tactic is a little bit, I think, different, and not little bit, but different, as we saw in Romania. We could say that they are working I am thinking Kremlin, they are working as dual target strategy, something like that. Like one audience is domestic Russian citizens for them in Russia who are told stories about like hostile and dying Europe to divert attention from their economic stagnation, what we have heard and know. And the second is like Baltics itself also, that they are trying to discredit as how we are living, or style of living, or values, and or Western oriented life. That the Russophobia is here, and economic failures, and Nazism and fascism is thriving here. So it's like little bit, not little bit, but it's different as we saw. So I wouldn't say that the elections itself is the biggest issue, but overall environment, informational space where we are living is like all the time on first front line. So this is why I wouldn't say that the election itself. Of course, we have seen reviews, and also, I don't know, for example, constitutional like defense bureau. They also have had their review for 2025, and they have said that yes, elections will be one of the main points, but it's one part of overall Kremlin strategy.
Yes, you said that the situation in Latvia is different, for example, than from Romania, but still, are there any visible lessons being drawn from experiences elsewhere, like in Romania or in other countries that had elections? Or is the debate really largely domestic?
Largely domestic. We had that Latvian president Edgars Rinkēvičs. He had an interview in Delphi where he said that we must take our lessons from Romania and Moldova, and the lesson is that something like that can happen. Yes, but I think we knew that already, and especially after Romania. But we haven't implemented as at least visibly something as would be like lesson practical, some institutional, some safety regulation or something like that. It's more like let's watch. There's something like that happened. We have to be careful, but nothing as, I wouldn't say, broader.
Okay, that's perhaps something that could change with the new European Democracy Shield. We will talk about it later, but one of the, let's say, tools that this shield is offering for countries is that they could have some kind of platform to, share better their experiences with these particular incidents and, to somehow better coordinate in their responses. So that's something that could be changed. But Philips, I have another question for you. In your country, in Latvia, do you think that the disinformation is treated primarily as some kind of a security issue or future of democracy issue, or more as something as a regulatory or media problem? Like, what's the scale, let's say, of this disinformation agenda in Latvia?
I would say it is primarily a security issue. From state perspective, if we are looking at it, it doesn't mean that that the media are excluded from this. It's not like this. But if you look at, for example, the national security conception or some regulations other in informational safety and defense, then we would find many points where it's said that it is a security issue. But it's not excluding. I think it's parallel to the media landscape and as how we are trying to combat it by ourselves, or in some cases also with a state help. One thing what happened was that after the full-scale war started, then national TV and radio broadcaster initiated banning propaganda channels, and it means that it was state decision to interfere in such a way and to fight back propaganda. So it is, I would say it's primarily a security issue, but it includes media as an actor in that.
Okay, yeah, we will talk also about the role of media later in this podcast. Let me just quickly say also what happened in the Czech Republic. As I mentioned at the beginning, we in Czech Republic had elections last year in the autumn, and these elections from the very beginning were preceded by warnings from Czech intelligence services that Russia could attempt to influence the vote, and of course there were many discussions about what happened in Romania and that we have to avoid this scenario. And in practice, the elections at the end were widely considered free and fair. Maybe it's because of the fact that most openly pro-Kremlin party failed. This party was called Stachio, and it was some kind of successor of the Communist Party. And before elections, there were polls that were putting this party, kind of high when it comes to party rankings. They had 7% in some of the polls, but at the end they didn't made it to the parliament. So I think that these worries that these particular elections could be massively impacted by Russian propaganda somehow failed because, as I said, this most pro-Kremlin party did not succeed. But of course, there were other smaller parties that made it to the parliament, even to the government. But it's now, difficult to somehow measure the impact of Russian propaganda on Czech parliamentary elections. But what I want to open now, it's kind of also a topic that emerged in Czechia, is that, surveys that were published before elections showed that there was a growing concern that it is the EU rather than Russia that could be influencing election. And it's true that the political forces, some of them, were increasingly framing EU initiatives against disinformation as some kind of censorship. We had big debates about the Digital Services Act. And, at the end, as I said, according to some surveys that were actually commissioned by the Czech Interior Ministry, the results were kind of shocking, at least for me, that almost half of the Czech citizens thinks, or the respondents of this survey thinks, that the EU could somehow intervene in our elections. So, Philips, do you see similar narratives in Latvia, or is it really something that happened only in my country?
I would say no, it is not Latvian case. We have seen some cases that, of course, Russian propaganda tries to push this narrative that the EU somehow is this bureaucratic and propaganda monsters that somehow attacks democratic people living in Baltics also. But aside some marginal narratives from their side in Latvia itself, no. It could also be because even conservatives in Latvia and nationalists, they are rarely very critical to EU, as they see the EU more as a protective shield that could help us against Russia, because we are in border. The Russia is our neighbor, unfortunately, and this could be some different actor as in Czech Republic, I think.
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. And Manuela, back for you. Now, after what happened in Romania, is the EU framed as a defender of democracy or more as part of the problem?
Difficult to answer. You mentioned the shield. I'm going to use only this word, the shield. What happened in November with our elections, which ended annulled, was a sort of blitzkrieg. I like to call it blitzkrieg because it was a shock. The candidate, which was the first position, completely surprising everybody, polls, journalists, everybody, did not have. We didn't pay attention to his discourse at the end of the day, but we didn't realize, and I'm saying we, the society itself, the journalists, simply didn't pay attention to this candidate, and his discourse was not a pro-Kremlin discourse at the time. Not necessarily, not in an obvious way. It was rather similar to the Ayatollah style, so somehow religious, shaped, not necessarily religious. So it was sort of pseudoscience, so a lot of words without significant contents. That was a shock. That's why I'm calling it a sort of blitzkrieg in terms of information, because nobody really expected, nobody paid attention, and the themes were inoffensive. Afterwards, the journalist digged into what he said and on various channels, social media, and discovered that he had pro-Kremlin not only speech but videos shot in a Kremlin style. Putin in some ways. So, but it took always months to realize that, and then somehow it was surprising that pro-Russian, pro-Putin, pro-Kremlin positions started to emerge. But the idea is, just to come back to my first ideas of the blitzkrieg. So, of course, in this disinformation, massive disinformation operations, hybrid most of the time, there are all sorts of narratives, mostly mockery, so not very consistent, not very serious, of course, not factual. Even, attacking the other side, the EU, the pro-European leaders and so on. It's in a sort of a mockery, but at the same time, fanaticism. So it's a combination, but I think what's the most important is the time. I mean, the speed. The idea is to operate very fast. That's why I'm calling Blitzkrieg, because after some time, when you realize what's happening, maybe you'll have time to think of it, But of course, this doesn't mean that the populist wave is not increasing. It's still increasing, and it's dangerously increasing. The extremist speech also has increased a lot. So all this, as I said, fanaticism, which can be probably guided towards some aim. So not necessarily a political orientation, rather ideological. So that's what is happening. Speaking about the shield, of course we need a shield, but we need a shield to protect us against blitzkriegs. So against very fast and unexpected operations, which are probably planned. And I'm saying probably because it was revealed by various investigations even before elections that inauthentic coordinated behavior in the social media did exist. No measure against it, no legal intervention. So we need to work together within various networks at the state level, in the society, between countries. We need transnational cooperation, and indeed we need this shield. We need to better implement the DSA and the other connected acts which are regulating the platforms. We do have the best legislation overall, globally, with regard to the platform. We do need the courage to implement it, and for sure the cooperation to implement a legislation which is targeting global platforms. Think that one platform probably has outcomes equal to GDP of one of our states. So it's an enormous struggle for influence. I have summarized some very, very briefly ideas from the National Strategy of Defense concerning disinformation, but maybe I'm not sure whether I have to talk about it now or maybe later.
Yeah, thank you for especially emphasizing this speed, this briskness when it comes to this threat that appeared during the Romanian elections, and this very quick rise of one of the candidates that was out of the lens of most of the journalists at that time. Maybe coming back to my question slightly, do you think that after this incident with your presidential elections, do you think that actually the criticism of the EU intensified? That, for example, the EU was, part of the problem, or that the EU didn't protect Romania from this incident? Or did anything change about the narratives about the EU itself, about the EU as an institution?
Of course, it intensified, but I would not call it criticism, because criticism is okay. It would be more than welcome. Criticism is normal in a democracy. What we are witnessing is fanaticism in its most extreme form. It encompasses everything from mockery to highly aggressive language, from deepfakes, trolling, live threats, insults, intimidation campaigns targeting anyone who identifies with European values, and not only officials, from political leaders to ordinary citizens, not to speak about journalists or fact checkers and so on. So a wide range of techniques is employed, from cognitive manipulation to direct threats. Actually, the defense strategy call it dissonance cognitive war. So we are speaking about very complicated operations of modifying reality in the minds of people. And of course, the platforms are used into this act.
Yeah, that's very, let's say, interesting, but worrying at the same time. And it's completely different scenario than we heard from Philips in Latvia, where the EU is still considered as some kind of protector or shield against Russia. And we see in Romania that these mockery campaigns and, these kind of troubling narratives regarding the EU. You both mentioned the role of media, so maybe I would like to speak about a bit more in this part of the podcast. I will start with some Czech perspective, because in Czechia, Russian state media outlets such as Sputnik were blocked under EU sanctions, so we can no longer access Sputnik website, which was kind of popular before in the Czech Republic. But still, hundreds of websites continue to publish Kremlin-aligned narratives every day. And of course, it's then amplified through social media. There are great investigative reportings from Voxpot. I highly recommend our audience to check it out, because this Voxpot is small, Czech medium, but they did really great job, because they had actually documented this ecosystem of like dozens or hundreds of small websites that are only, translating to Czech language what is written in Kremlin propaganda channels. And despite they discovered this like very, active ecosystem, which when it comes to numbers of articles they are publishing every day or every month, like it's much more than any other Czech medium can produce, because of course they are mostly run by AI or other tools. And despite of this, there has been really little follow-up from authorities. Of course, some politicians, they mentioned it, that it is some kind of a threat and that we should do something about it, but there were no actions. And according to these like media reports, these websites are violating EU sanctions, actually, because it's not called Sputnik, but it's very, very similar. And, under Czech and EU sanctions, this could not be happening in our member states. But these websites with direct link to Kremlin are still running. So, Manuela, if you can say what is the situation in Romania? Are there also such disinformation websites, and does the government actively block them?
Yes, actually, I was talking about such campaigns, and what the government does is to start working on it. Which I know, as journalists, that we are not enough patient just to wait for something to be more consistent. What is already important is that we do have included in the strategy, in the defense strategy, a few points of firstly acknowledging the disinformation which is happening, and I'm underlining some points from the strategy. It acknowledges that there is a growing risk that the technology will be used aggressively, not just by the state, but also by criminal networks and terrorist groups. And the digital world is making the disinformation easier to spread and the societies to become polarized. As I said, it's called cognitive warfare. And of course, democracy needs to consolidate its institution. This is what we see now. We are somehow witnessing the consolidation of the state, but it's a permanent struggle within the state. And as I said, the society somehow feels not so much encouraged to continue, because there is a lot of pressure on those balanced. So not on those pro-Europeans, but on those balanced. It's difficult to remain balanced in such a polarized environment. The fact is, maybe they are not. The pro-Europeans probably, as it was proven in the Iran elections, it was a fragile majority, but it was a majority pro-European at the end of the Iran elections. But the aggressivity of the opponents towards EU, of those who are against, not criticizing, but as I said, criticism is good. I mean, is more than welcome. But those who are trying to attack simply everybody who is oriented to European values, their aggressivity is so high that, it somehow fills in the whole online environment. It, at the same time, amplified most often through inauthentic coordinated behavior that it was tracked. So the authorities need to take more courageous actions and to apply the law, because the law exists. Yes, there were some steps. I mean, our broadcasting regulator started to implement, let's say, more measures to be more active, but it's still a lot to do. And the disappointment is quite high from those who have expected, for 30 years now, to have something changed here in the society.
Okay, of course, needs to be done. I think it's something that's connecting all our countries. But now let's see what's actually happening in Latvia. From our January collaborative report, you can read that actually Latvia's took strong regulatory steps early by blocking Kremlin-linked channels. But Philips, did this significantly reduce consumption of disinformation, or did audiences just simply migrate to alternative platforms and channels?
I would say that it had its effect, and it was a positive effect starting from the 2022. I think that radio and television regulator has blocked approximately 500 internet pages, more than 100 television channels. And if we would how to measure the effectiveness, one would be that we see how many times people in Latvia tries to reach those banned internet pages, for example. And each month that number is around 300,000. And if you take in mind that in Latvia overall, like we are under 2 million in population, it's not a small amount. Of course, some of those are repeating tries how to get to that page, but anyhow, it's a big number. Of course, part of those, especially television channel, they migrated to YouTube mostly. Mostly to YouTube. We see that a lot of propaganda content is spread through YouTube, also Telegram, TikTok, and it is there. So, did the banning solve the problem? No, but I think it helped. So something needed to be done. We tried to understand what can be done, and this was one of the first things that where we could act. And in this case, I believe that the state actually has done a pretty good job. But this is only one part. The second part would be the media literacy, critical thinking, and how to recognize what is what in social media. And there, in this point, Latvia as a state, we are not doing enough at all. We are trying something, but in this educational process, it's more problematic. How to ban pages and televisions, there we are doing what we can.
Yeah, it's true that education and building resilience among the society is, one of the points that actually European citizens are mentioning when they are asked, like, how to, improve the situation and how to make our democracies better and, adapted to this new reality. But yeah, coming back to this like banning of websites. Philips, was there any actually backlash from the citizens, from people, when, as you said, the government blocked these Kremlin-linked channels? Were there any, narratives that were saying that, for example, the government is doing some kind of censorship, or was it somehow accepted that we are facing the war and it's, necessary step to do?
Yeah, the second one, it was accepted, and maybe there was something, but then I didn't see it, or it was not in a public discussion as a serious issue. So state took step and did what needed to be done in this matter. Maybe one of the explanations could be, especially regarding the television channels, that the major audience is seniors, like elderly people. So maybe some kind of contraction is more limited, maybe, but it's just an idea. I don't know, is it true? But no, there were not big discussions or contra reactions in Latvia here. We saw, of course, from Kremlin something, propaganda and all the usual stuff, but here in Latvia, no.
Okay, that's interesting. And you said also that many of these channels they just move to YouTube or Telegram. Are there any efforts to tackle them on these like new platforms like YouTube or Telegram, or is the government somehow trying to communicate, for example, with YouTube or Telegram to solve this issue and to ban them also from these channels?
If you talk about social media, then it more comes to media companies, and that editorials are trying to explain or make fact checks about something false spread in social media. That is one part. Yes, there have been also from state communication with YouTube, for example, but options to regulate and ban something there is much more limited. So the effect was much more visible when we talk about legacy media.
Yes, yes. I would like to now touch last topic of our podcast, and it's something that we already mentioned several times, but I'm wondering what are the, let's say, the proper reactions. It is the European Union's democracy shield. Just to sum up for our audience, this shield was published in November 2025, and it is promising stronger EU-level action against disinformation. This shield includes a creation of European Center for Democratic Resilience that should bring together expertise from member states, and there should be some kind of more coordinated responses to large-scale disinformation or manipulation campaigns, as we already mentioned it earlier, and it should also present some kind of crisis protocol under the Digital Services Act, and also strengthen the independence network of fact checkers, and support some monitoring and analyzing of the situation in all EU languages. Phillips, a question for you: how this initiative is actually being received in Latvia? Are government members, politicians, experts actively discussing this democracy shield, or is it largely absent from domestic debate?
It is absent. It is absent. So there is not public discussion at all. There have been news reports, some reports that something like that happens, but the language and the understanding what it means and what it practically will mean is blurred. It's not clear. And also among politicians in Latvia, if we look at the media understanding and knowledge among, for example, in parliament, then the knowledge base for media policy is very low. So it comes to that this is an issue, but what is debated, but only among very limited expert and institutional level. It's only in small amounts right now.
Okay, so let's hope that our project will help to, make more waves around this EU initiatives. Manuela, how is the discussion in Romania? I know you mentioned some positions regarding this shield, but did you hear anything from the government members or president or MEPs about this democracy shield? Some reactions?
Not really, not really. But as I said, there is not a lot of communication. Somehow, as journalists, we don't receive too much communication. They are very careful with what they communicate. It's not because I know they are not working. I mean, they promise of working, and I'm sure that the efforts are aligned with the EU efforts. So I can't say that there is a lot of discussion around it, but itself, the European Shield, I think it's important, and it's important not only at the institutional level. If I can compare it, I will compare it with what's happening with health. When you have an emergency, there is a crisis task force which alert other states, and those states can help. And this, I think, can be duplicated or multiplicated, and this needs to be multiplicated because, as I said, you can't work at the level of the state with global platforms with huge power. And it's not myself saying that, it's a strategy also underlying the supremacy, actually source of a race towards the supremacy in terms of AI. So we need to be prepared at European level, especially as we have a good legislation regarding the video sharing platforms. We need to improve the implementation, as I said, and we need to, at the level of the EU and the level of the state, the fact checkers and the journalists need support, and they, in my view, they need to be encouraged to cooperate. Not only the fact checkers, of course, they are very important, but also the journalists, because the media is under assault as well.
Yes, speaking about the shield, I have to sadly say that there's also silence about it in the Czech Republic. But we recently asked one Czech MEP from the governing party ANO, and we heard really critical comments warning that the shield could be used to justify some kind of broader content regulation or limit dissenting voice. So I have to say that they were not really enthusiastic enthusiastic about this shield, but of course some experts, they were praising this new initiatives. And I think that these mixed reactions reflect some broader tensions we can see in Czech debate about balancing democratic protection with some kind of media freedom and at some point even national sovereignty, because these parties are saying that this is the tool that the EU could use, to somehow damage our national sovereignty. But of course, these narratives are making absolutely no sense. And yeah, unfortunately, we ran out of our time for this podcast. So big thanks to Philips and Manuela for joining this podcast and for you to, express and really go deeper in the situation in your countries and expressing it in such an interesting way. So thank you, Manuela, and thank you, Philips.
Thanks for having me.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of the Eastern Flank Project podcast. Thanks to our listeners for joining us. We are now preparing a third edition of this podcast. This time we will focus on transatlantic relations, and it will be published at the end of February. So definitely stay with us. And this is all from us now. So thank you for listening and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye bye.